almost 10 years ago, in a very different office than this. It was this small nook under a loft bed in an apartment in New York City. I started working on this book called The Obstacle is the Way. Flash forward now, that book has sold millions of copies. It's in 40 languages. I'm also a very different person than I was when I wrote it. And I'm having this unique experience of the publisher asked me to write a new foreword, to go in and kind of correct things, change things, tweak things, update. The Obstacle is the Way. Here are my note cards. I have a stack of note cards that I've accumulated since the book came out of just little things that I definitely want to add. So I have these, and then this is the box. This is the book as I wrote it. I'm gonna have to go back through these cards. Like, look, this is an email I sent myself as I was writing the intro to The Obstacle is the Way. Let's see when I do that. Hey, concussion. This is the intro. This is a chunk of the intro of The Obstacle is the Way, which I sent myself as a note in June of that year, I think. So I was already working on the intro, and then this made it into the book. So I'm just going back through and tweaking stuff. I'm already making some changes. That's my next little project, the 10th anniversary edition of The Obstacle is the Way. Almost 10 years ago exactly, I was in this exact spot. I was going for a run along the East River in Manhattan, and this idea popped into my head. When something like, in the year 170, in his tent on the front line in the war in Germania, Marcus Aurelius sat down to write. That's the first line in The Obstacle is the Way. I was on my run and it just popped into my head. That book has gone on to sell millions of copies. It reintroduced Stoicism to millions of people. It's been this incredible journey that I could not have anticipated. But I sort of take two quick lessons from that. One, it's always a good idea to go for a run. When you get your body moving, you have no idea what can pop into your head. And two, there's this Stoic idea that we never step in the same river twice. The river's different. I'm different. I'm standing in the exact spot, but so much has transpired. How I would even think about that line, how I think about the Stoics has changed. We are always changing. The world is always changing, even though things stay the same. And that's the lesson. Seneca wasn't just a philosopher, he was a writer. And so he knew this very acutely, the mortification you feel when you go back and read or edit something. Not just that you did, but that you put out in the world. He says, when I think of all the things I have said, I envy the mute. This process of going back through and updating The Obstacle is the Way 10 years later, of listening to my voice on the audiobook, having to redo the audiobook, changing sentences, seeing sentences that not just like I put out in the world, but literally millions of people saw. You envy the mute. It's a very humbling thing to go back and look at what you did, at what you thought was your best work, and maybe indeed was your best work at that time. And you see what does or doesn't age well. I think what doesn't age well is certainty, simplification, judgment. And so hopefully as I've gone back through The Obstacle is the Way, I've softened some of those things. I've been kinder, more empathetic, more nuanced. Mostly I'm trying to take that forward on the next project. Like if you think about that unpleasant feeling, I get to adjust it, fix it here, but I can't undo that it happened in the past. What I can do though, is on my next project, be a little wiser, be a little kinder, be a little bit more open-minded, do a little bit more work. So in a way, that's the real lesson. That's like the way I'm getting better for having gone through this sometimes agonizing process. I'm seeing all the ways that I have changed and become better in the last 10 years, but I want to become better so that when I look at this edition in 10 years, there's still going to be some mortification, still going to be some changes I want to make, but hopefully fewer of them still. I haven't written the new preface yet, but you can see all the red stuff. So here's just some tweaks. there's a whole, like, I'm adding stuff. Like, I have this chapter about Rockefeller in the book, and like, obviously Rockefeller was not the greatest dude, so I'm sort of qualifying that. There's a paragraph there. I'm cutting, there's a section on Rommel that I'm cutting. This is a piece about the Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield. He's saying that I've done this in like a million talks. So, and I found it after I finished the book, and I would talk about it when I would talk about The Obstacles Away. The audience has always loved it, so I'm adding that in the book. But he has this great line. He says that in space, when you run into a problem, there's a bunch of things you can do to make a situation better. And then he says there's no problem so bad that you cannot make it worse also. So that's going in there. For instance, I've already messed with, let's see, I did a lot on one of my favorite stories in the book, which is how Marcus, at the end of his life, so I'm adding, this is a deeper story, that the end of the book as I wrote it 10 plus years ago was only about Marcus and the fight against Avidius Cassius, but I'm taking this more, a fuller picture of Marcus, which is the plague that he faces, the floods that he faces, his stomach ailment, the years at war, burying children, just like a life of pain and struggle. There's this ancient historian that says that Marcus doesn't meet with the good fortune that he deserves, and his whole reign is involved in a series of troubles. And so I'm sort of talking about how Marcus's life embodies this idea of the obstacles, the way that he doesn't just coin the phrase, that his life really illustrates how he lived it. So anyways, these are all the things that I'm adding, and I have to turn it in by beginning of January to get it out for the 10th anniversary. So that's what I'm working on now. As crazy as this week has been, I feel like I will spin off the planet if I don't get at least one small look at the manuscript I'm supposed to be working on, which is the 10-year anniversary of Obstacle. My rule, this is like a discipline thing too, is like, you don't have to be perfect all the time. You don't have to make enormous contributions. You just have to make lots of little contributions. And so if I can just go, hey, did I do 1 or 2 good things to the manuscript this week? That's enough. That's what I'm doing now. So it might seem like this isn't what a writer does. You know, it's like spinning a globe and just pointing out where we're gonna go. I'm literally just kind of like rolling the dice and pulling up a random spot and just kind of spot checking and seeing what I want to fix. Go ahead. Yes. Probably the biggest change between writing it the first time and working on it now is just came in my life or my lifestyle. I was with my wife when I was writing The Obstacles Away, but we lived in this tiny apartment in New York City. We had a dog, but we didn't have kids. We weren't married. And as I'm working on it now, I have 2 kids. I mean, my son is turning 8 this fall, so he's almost as old as the book. But you know, my life is noisier, my life is more unpredictable, my life is more chaotic, I have more responsibilities. It's not right to say that having kids is an obstacle, it's not, but it is a challenge. It is a constant trial. It challenges you in so many ways. And as I have been working on the book, that's one of the things I thought a lot about, is how do these ideas inform me as a parent? How do you apply these ideas to the unpredictable, crazy, exhausting, overwhelming 24/7 job that is raising human beings? Where do I find the time to work on this book in addition to all the things that I have going on? It was a lot. The last 10 years have been a lot. It is Thanksgiving. It is Thanksgiving 2023. My kids are watching SpongeBob on the TV there, and I am in Florida on vacation down by the beach, and I am working on the preface of the new intro. I've been chugging away on this, and it's just going to be like maybe 1-2 pages at the beginning of the book to mark the fact that 10 plus years ago I sat down to write this book. I'm talking about the fact that this one person I knew predicted it would sell 5,000 copies. The Obstacles Away sold more like 2 million copies. There was probably a couple thousand people who cared about Stoicism on the internet at that time. And now every morning the Daily Stoic reaches 1 million people by like 9 a.m. So that's sort of what I'm talking about, how I've come to interact and understand the material since so much has happened since it came out. There was the pandemic, there was the books doing well, there was hundreds of thousands of miles on the road, there was getting married, there was having kids, just a lot of life. And that's what the new intro is about. And then we're gonna go have Thanksgiving together as a family. We are heading to the Breakfast Club to do Right Thing right now. And then my publisher is like right here and I have to drop off the 10-year anniversary manuscript of Obstacle. Don't get hit by a car. It's crazy to me that 10 years ago, almost exactly, this book was being released, my first book on Stoicism, and now I'm editing the 10-year anniversary in the green room of the Breakfast Club. I got to drop this off on my publisher, who, when I wrote it the first time, was way downtown on Varick Street, and now is all the way up here near the park, because Penguin merged with Random House, but now I'm just tightening up. This is the second pass, which I guess now is like my 5th or 6th pass because I've done it so many times, but keeping our word does cost us. But it's not free to break your word, because the next time that person's not going to trust someone else. And so we all think about it as like, what's good for me? But what we're doing is we're stealing from the public trust, from our ability to collaborate and count on each other, because everyone's saying, you know, your word isn't worth anything. And collectively, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, it's not.
I pride myself on being honest and truthful at all times. I love chapter 3 in the book, Tell the Truth. But I think sometimes when we say, I'm going to be honest with you, it's a buffer to this whammy I'm about to lay on you.
I'm actually going to be a dick, is what I'm
saying.
Yeah. So I'm still pretty old school about it. Not only do I write the books with physical note cards, having read physical books, but then I do all my notes. I have the publisher print them, like print me out a bound manuscript. I want to see what it's going to look like in the size that it's going to be, and then I do all my notes. This is the second pass, but so I realized something crazy. I realized that I seconded the first draft of this 11 years ago on a plane flying across Australia, and then here it's still up there. It doesn't feel like it is 10 years. That's insane. Am I in here? Where? Trust me on lines up there? That's incredible. And that one. Oh, they're not behind the glass?
Yeah, try to keep your hands to yourself.
How do I get all 6
Oh, there's
feet
obstacle.
here? Oh, where? Whoa. Okay, that's insane.
Yeah.
So then we'll have to replace it with a new one. Do you think that's a first edition?
It might be.
How do you decide which one's going?
You can find out.
Like, do you ever demote off?
I don't think we ever take anyone away.
I am now having to do the new audiobook. It's a Saturday. I got up early. I came here before my kid's soccer game. It's supposed to be a 20, 25 minute drive. Took 50 minutes. was getting frustrated about the traffic. Then I came upon the source of the traffic, and it was a fatal car accident. There was the body out in the road covered in a tarp, and it sort of put some things in perspective. And I was trying to think, okay, what did I do with the extra 25 minutes? Was I as in control of my emotions as I'd like to be? I don't think so, but I listened to a nice podcast in the road. I learned something. It gave me an excuse to text a friend about that podcast. So I'm gonna see it as a positive, and then I get to come here and do what I love. I noticed something here that I need to fix already. That's the other thing about audiobooks. What they are is a chance for you to read the draft all the way through very slowly, sort of performatively, and you catch some stuff that you want to fix.
When you go through the book, how do you determine what you want to change and what stays?
There's a bunch of very specific things that I had notes that I wanted to change, and then I would just, every day I was working on it, I would just open it, flip to a random spot, and then just kind of reread it and ask myself, hey, is this how I would say this now? How could this be said better? What is this missing? So a lot of times it was stuff like that. And then even during the audiobook, which I just did, and in this chair, having to say every word of it out loud was like an excruciating experience, because I hadn't done that for 11 years.
Yeah.
And to go through and have to say things that you put into print a decade ago. There's a Seneca thing. He says, when I think of all the things that I have said, I envy the mute. And the experience of editing something you've already published or re-recording the audiobook of something that millions of people have listened to, you're like, it's horrifying, because you go, I said that? Like, I allowed myself to leave it at that. And not everywhere. There's lots and lots and lots of parts of The Obstacles Away I'm very proud of. But if you can reread something you wrote or worked on a long time ago and you think it's perfect, to me, that's a sign that you haven't gotten any better since you've done it. Like, the idea that you don't have improvements to make, to me, would imply that was the peak, which I definitely don't think is true, and I definitely don't want to be true. What was the point of continuing to do it if you're not getting any better?
I always think you have a unique relationship to your work, in that it's like a lot of your favorite stuff as a reader that you're bringing together.
Sure.
And the experience of going back and looking at a lot of those stories, I imagine, was like, I actually think the lesson embedded in that story is different than I initially thought. Yeah.
Well, that's the idea, that when they say, no, you don't step in the same river twice, that's the other part of it, is that what stands out at you in a specific story is different. And the meaning of it can be different. Like when I talked about Rockefeller at 24, I'm just thinking of him, and I'm only thinking about him in the context of, how did this guy overcome obstacles? I'm only thinking of the heroic aspects. But then the book I wrote immediately after was about ego. And then I wrote a book about stillness. And then I've written a book about discipline. And then I wrote a book about justice. And so if those subsequent deep dives into topics don't inform your worldview going forward, what does that say? And so now, and of course I understood these things about Rockefeller, but that wasn't what I was focused on. Those weren't like the salient things that were jumping out at me. But now, looking back at this person and my own writing and what I want the book to mean to people, you're adding on these additional layers. And I think the portrait that I present of him is more nuanced. And then also, just on top of this, I've had a decade more of reading. So I've read more. Like, my stuff on Ulysses S. Grant, my stuff on Lincoln in this book, I think are much better now, because I've read literally thousands of pages about their lives and the time that they lived. And all the while I was making, that's a perfect Obstacles Away thing that I want to add in there. And so I just, I had these like It's like comedians talk about tags. There was just like, which is like a thing at the end of a joke. There's just like a lot of little tags or little extra layers or an additional detail that I wanted to put in there.
So I remember in the prologue or the intro of this book, you specifically talk about or sort of anticipating a lot of people's how they associated the word Stoicism 10 years ago.
Yes.
And the work you've done since then to make that word mean something very different to a lot of people now.
Yeah.
And did that...
I remember when I was writing the book, the Stoicism subreddit on Reddit had like 9,000 subscribers. And I think it has like 500,000 now, some crazy number. Yeah. And so, yeah, when I was writing The Obstacles Away, it was, hey, let me tell you about this thing called Stoicism. And the task was much more along the lines of popularizing and making interesting a thing that a lot of people did not think was interesting. Mm-hmm. And then one of the tricky things about success is if you succeed, the original context in which you were operating is obliterated. And so the idea that Stoicism was this unattractive or uninteresting thing to people no longer exists. And so I think that's something else I wanted to very much address in the book. I'm now obligated and able to give a fuller picture of the philosophy that I think is more urgently needed than it was then, if that makes sense. The feeling I feel most strongest from this experience, though, is just gratitude. The idea when I was writing The Obstacles Away that I would still be writing 10 years later, that it would sell millions of copies, that it'd be in all these different languages, that I would have this platform, that Stoicism would be as popular as it is, that was incomprehensible to me. I feel incredibly fortunate, and that's possible because every one of you that watched one of these videos, that followed us on social media, that read the book, I wouldn't be here, the book wouldn't be here, Stoicism wouldn't be here without the collective. And also just the sheer amount of emails and feedback and sometimes not so nice criticism, but criticism that was not incorrect. All of that shaped and informed who I am as a person and also shaped and informed this new edition of the book. And I'm better for all of that and I appreciate it.